Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel the specific mechanics of SAP Billing and Revenue Innovation Management, or, SAP Brim, as most of us call it. We're zooming right into subscription order management to focus on a total powerhouse feature, the Business Transactions Maintenance Framework, or simply BTMF. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how those insanely complex subscription changes are handled seamlessly in the backend, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll be covering the Subscription Change Challenge, introducing the BTMF framework, inside BTMF customizing, the API and execution flow, and finally, an example using a cloud selection service. So we're taking this from the macro problem all the way down to a real-world API execution. First up, Section 1, the Subscription Change Challenge. To really get why this framework exists, we first need to look at the massive, industry-wide shift towards flexible consumption models. Just imagine the headache for a second. Your customer is exactly halfway through their billing month, right? And suddenly, out of nowhere, they decide they want a premium upgrade. How in the world does your back-end system orchestrate that? How do you calculate the prorated charges without causing an absolute billing disaster or completely wrecking your master data? Honestly, it's the exact kind of scenario that keeps billing operations teams up at night. And it really comes down to this massive contrast. Unlike rigid traditional sales, which are basically a one-and-done execution, dynamic subscriptions are, well, they're living entities. They are constantly changing. Customers want to upgrade, downgrade, or just completely cancel at a moment's notice. And if you don't have a structured, rock-solid way to manage these changes, it literally leads to technical chaos in your ERP system. All right, moving right along to Section 2, introducing the BTMF framework. Now that we've properly agitated the problem, let's look at the structured, elegant solution that is built right into SAP S/4HANA service. So the crucial takeaway here is that BTMF acts as the central nervous system for your active contracts. It's not just some one-off transaction, it's an entire framework. Its whole job is to detect a change trigger, whether that's coming from a live agent or an external web portal, and then perfectly orchestrate the exact response needed to update that active subscription completely safely. Just look at the standard change processes it handles natively. I mean, whether a customer wants to revoke a cancellation, maybe extend their current term, change a product quantity, or just totally revamp their product's configuration, BTMF actually has a predefined path for it. You literally do not have to custom build the logic for every single scenario, which is a massive time saver. Now, the truly fascinating part is the core mechanism of how BTMF actually protects your data. It never, ever just overwrites the active contract directly. Scratch that. It always creates a change order first. So the system copies the latest technically active contract into this temporary order, applies the customer's changes safely within that order, and only then does it commit those updates back to the active contract. It's honestly a brilliant fail-safe mechanism. Let's jump into Section 3, inside BTMF customizing. We're going to zoom into the backend now and see how this framework is actually configured in the SAP customizing menus. This is really where the magic happens. So, looking at this sequence, you can see how it builds progressively. We don't want to get bogged down by heavy technical configuration, so think of it as a three-step dance. First, you define the change process. Then you define the change process group. And finally, you activate the change process in the system. Simple enough, right? Let's break down that very first step, defining the change process. Here, you have to map out specific parameters. For instance, you set the scenario to provider, which just tells the system, hey, this is specifically valid for subscription contracts. Then you link it to a process type. You might use ISTF, for example, which is basically just SAP's identifier for a contract change requiring a change order. And finally, the implementation class. That simply holds the actual ABAP programming code logic needed to execute the whole thing. Which brings us to the final customizing steps. Once you follow that configuration path, you start creating change process groups. Now, grouping is incredibly vital. It bundles related processes together, and that is exactly how external APIs know what changes can actually be triggered. And of course, nothing works at all until you officially add your process to the Activate Change process node in the backend. You have to flip the switch. Moving on to Section 4, the API and execution flow. Since modern businesses, rarely trigger these changes strictly from the SAP graphical user interface, they're mostly using e-commerce web portals and external systems, we absolutely need to understand how the API talks to the BTMF framework.
The easiest way to think of the BTMF container is like a highly secure briefcase. When an external system basically says, hey, I need to change this contract, it packs all the necessary technical parameters into this global data container. That briefcase is then carried right into the SAP framework, ensuring the change process has all the exact, perfectly formatted inputs it needs to execute.
So, what exactly is inside that briefcase? Well, you have to pack specific name-value pairs. You tell the system the specific process type that you defined earlier in customizing, and, super importantly, you pass the exact UTC timestamp for the activation date. This way, SAP knows exactly, down to the second, when this change takes effect for billing purposes. It's incredibly precise. The crucial takeaway here is that your external e-commerce portal doesn't have to just guess how to format this request. It actually queries the change process group API first. The API basically tells the external portal, all right, here are the allowed changes for this specific contract, and here are the exact fields I need you to send back to me. It ensures perfectly validated data is flowing into SAP every single time. All right, finally, Section 5. Example. Cloud Selection Service. Let's ground all of these backend acronyms, API calls, and customizing tables with a concrete, real-world example straight from our source material. Okay, let's dive into this scenario. Picture an IT department that already has a master agreement and an active provider contract for a cloud selection service, currently sitting on a standard pay-as-you-go tier. Right in the middle of the month, they realize they urgently need better support, so they request an upgrade to the Gold SLA, the service level agreement. All they do is click Upgrade on a web portal.
And here is exactly how that lifecycle plays out behind the scenes. That single click on the web portal generates an API call. The API packs that Gold SLA request, along with a UTC timestamp, right into the BTMF container. BTMF receives it, immediately spins up an iStack change order, applies the Gold SLA to the copied contract data, and finally safely writes it back to the live master data. That external request seamlessly converts into an active SAP change, completely protecting the integrity of your billing. That brings us to our final thought for today. Just think about the alternative for a second. Manual interventions, totally disconnected systems, and massive headache-inducing billing errors at month end. By automating complex mid-cycle changes with BTMF, how many hours of manual reconciliation could you honestly eliminate from your billing operations? If your dynamic subscriptions are currently causing you chaos, well, isn't it time to leverage this framework and let BTMF be the true automated nervous system of your contracts? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this clears up the mechanics between SAP SOM and the BTMF process.